He is thanking the soldiers who killed probably around 20 Russian airmen during their march on Moscow in a direct challenge to his power, as he told them to stop. Vladimir Putin just made a speech with his regime on the ropes. He's just been challenged by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group. A challenge has been made to a central authority where a military mutiny at the very least took place, where the Wagner Group took Rostov, which is the headquarters of the Southern Military Command, which manages not only the area around Rostov, but also the military in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Crimea. It is also a major logistical hub towards Donetsk and Luhansk, and then he marched on Moscow. Why did he do this? It's a little complicated, but the crux of it is that he has this beef with the Russian Ministry of Defense, the MOD, Sergei Shoigu, who's the Minister of Defense, and Gerasimov, who is the Chief of Staff of the Russian Armed Forces. These guys have been having political back and forth with Prigozhin for a very long time, with Prigozhin constantly criticizing them, constantly lambasting them on Telegram, saying that under their leadership, the Ukrainians might take Crimea, saying that they're purposely strangling Prigozhin and the Wagner Group of military resources, leading to his soldiers dying. He's recorded videos with tons of bodies behind him, saying, look at all these people who have died because the Ministry of Defense will not support them. He blames every major failing of the war on them, while the Ministry of Defense have been trying to box Wagner in by trying to take away possibly their supplies, if you believe what Prigozhin's saying, and have been trying to box them in politically, with the best recent example of that being the renegotiation of the MOD contracts, which would allow the Ministry of Defense to have much more authority over Wagner and box Prigozhin out from a position of power. Now, that contract was set to go into effect at the end of this month. And so Prigozhin, feeling cornered, took this big move. Now, all the other specifics of it, you can go look at my main timeline. I uploaded a timeline on my second channel, DylanBurnsLIVE, where you can see all of the juicy details of how the military coup, mutiny, whatever you want to call it, took place, where Russia was humiliated by the Wagner Group, at least the Russian government, the Ministry of Defense, and Putin to a certain extent. Now, in order to dissuade this mercenary army from marching on Moscow and taking over the capital, Lukashenko negotiated a deal with Prigozhin. And we don't know all the details of that deal or what exactly was talked about behind closed doors. But what was said at the time is that the people who did not participate in this coup would join the MOD. They would still sign the MOD contracts, but from what we've been told, that was a very small percentage of Wagner, and Prigozhin says it was only 1 to 2% in his speech, which we're going to watch after this, but we don't really know that. We don't know what percentage did participate and what percentage didn't, but we do know a lot did participate, so that could be quite small, or it could be slightly significant. We don't know. We also know that Prigozhin, according to the original deal, was safe. Everybody who participated in this push, this beer hall push, is safe, and that other details and issues would be discussed at a later point. Now, we're getting details that Wagner might be able to keep operations going in Belarus through Prigozhin leading it in Belarus. And in this speech we're about to watch, or we're not to watch, we're going to read it because all the translations suck. This is like our third time trying to read it or watch it on stream. We're going to see Putin try to show that he's still there, that he's still a strong leader, that this challenge to him and his government was no big deal, that we need to have unity and Russia's still unified, and also try to show that he is going to, have some repercussions. He's going to give repercussions, and that, he's not sending the message that you can lead a coup against him and then not be punished as long as you have enough soldiers and Russia's flank is weak enough. He doesn't want to send that message. So there's an importance of him sending a strong message in this speech that this type of behavior won't be tolerated and that those involved aren't getting completely off. But on the other hand, it seems that they also got completely off. And so that's the difficulty about this speech. So let's read it. Let's see the type of message that Putin's going to send as the cracks in his regime are starting to form. And we're going to be reading this and not listening to it because every single English translation that we've listened to is garbage. Every single one for the major news networks. So we're going to be reading the Medusa translation. Dear friends, I once again address all citizens of Russia. Thank you for your composure, your solidarity, and your patriotism. This civic solidarity has shown that any blackmail, any attempts to cause internal turmoil are doomed to failure. I repeat, the highest level of social consolidation, executive and legislative power at all levels, and a firm and ambiguous position of supporting the constitutional order were taken by public organizations, religious confessions, and leading political parties, virtually all of Russian society. So, the first thing is he says that it's doomed to failure, but I don't know if that's the message that was sent, because there was a decent chance that Wagner could get resolved due to it getting boxed out, and now it looks like that it won't be resolved, and it might be moved over to Belarus for operation. The person who led it is seemingly getting off scot-free, unless Putin does something drastic very soon and goes back on his word, and that Wagner still exists as an independent entity, and the people who were engaged in the coup, those foot soldiers, they get off as well. So, doomed to failure. I mean, it didn't succeed in overthrowing the government, but we don't even think that was his intention. Most analysts don't think his intention was to literally overthrow Putin's government. It was to challenge the MOD and protect Wagner from being, consolidated under the MOD, from being dissolved, and protect himself, because as you get boxed in, your life can be at risk, and that's how Russian politics works. It's very sad. Anyway, the second part of this that is interesting is he says that all sections of Russian society unified around Putin, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. If you look at the border guards, they let Wagner pass. If you look at the police in Rostov, they laid down their arms and let Wagner pass. The Rosguardia, the National Guard, it seems that basically everyone, except for the Russian Air Force, let Wagner move around uncontested. They either were completely apathetic and didn't care enough to stop them, or maybe they were just waiting to pick sides. Possibly they had sympathies, or maybe they were just terrified by Wagner because it has a reputation of beating its own soldiers to death with sledgehammers when they don't follow orders, and being a POW of that organization probably doesn't sound like a fun time. Anyway, I don't think it was nearly as unified as he's trying to make it out to be. But he does need to project unity because his society does not look particularly unified right now. There were those who did unify around him. Gerasimov and Shoigu, of course, being in the position they were going to support him and try to latch onto him for protection. General Armageddon, the guy who butchered Syria, we're talking about Sergei, not Sergei Shoigu, but Surovikin. He recorded a video telling Wagner to stop its antics, yada, yada. The Russian state media apparatus stayed quiet or flip-flopped in whatever direction the Russian government wanted. If you watched Russian state TV, it was a lot of commercials and like smooth jazz and whatever it could to, not 24 cover this advance, which could, possibly help them. So they at least had that support. But to say that Russian society all united around the central government, when cops laid down their arms, the National Guards didn't stop them, and the most you could do to stop them was bomb them and dig holes in the ground with the not the Air Force digging holes, but your agents digging holes, and bomb them, and then get your plane shot down by Wagner with their anti-air weapons as they continue their march. It doesn't seem particularly unified. I'm not saying he didn't have anyone on his side. I'm just saying there were a lot of people who took a step back and just waited to see what happened or laid down their arms. United in apathy, maybe. One key thing united and rallied everyone: responsibility for the fate of the fatherland. I would like to stress that we immediately made all decisions needed to neutralize the threat and to protect the constitutional order and lives and security of our citizens. The armed rebellion would have been put down in any case. So it's interesting to say this, because you say that, but then you didn't put it down. You bombed it, but you couldn't put it down as it marched on Moscow. Maybe it would have, but I mean, that's an alternative history scenario, right? And we're not YouTubers, we're world leaders. The rebellion's organizers, despite losing common sense, could not help but understand this. They understand it all, including that they had taken criminal action, that they had split and weakened a country that is now facing a colossal external threat. So he is acknowledging, at the very least, that this has weakened the country, which is an interesting admission. An unprecedented pressure from abroad when our comrades are dying on the front line amid cries of never retreat. This right here is something that Prigozhin tried to avoid. This idea that this military push, this mutiny, is undermining the Russian war effort. He was constantly saying during the whole operation that we're not interfering with aircraft that is engaged in bombing the Ukrainians. We are not doing anything on the front line. This is purely in Russia, and they're not trying to undermine the war effort. This is something that he constantly tried to emphasize. But Putin, of course, is still going to make that point because, you know, he can call upon the Russian nationalists who would have supported Wagner and say, hey, look, I know you might like Wagner. You might be spending time with the military blogosphere that's very critical of the MOD. But at the end of the day, we need to be unified, buddy. We need a unified front. However, the organizers of the rebellion, having betrayed their country and their people, also betrayed those who were dragged into the crime, lied to them, drove them to death at gunpoint to shoot at their own people. This is exactly what's wanted by Russia's enemies and the neo-Nazis in Kiev, their Western patrons, and various fifth columnists. Fifth columnists basically refer to people in Russia who want to destroy it from within. That's the you get the idea. People who want to destroy the Russian government. They'd like Russian soldiers to kill each other, for soldiers and civilians alike to die, so that Russia ultimately loses, and for a society to split, choked in bloody strife. They're rubbing their hands together, dreaming of taking revenge for their failure at the front and during the so-called counteroffensive. But they miscalculated. Thanks to our military personnel, employees of law enforcement agencies, and the special services who stood in the way of the insurrectionists. Again, they resorted to digging holes. He could say this if they were stopped with force, but Wagner turned around. They chose to turn around. Now, maybe the presence of a Praetorian Guard was a motivating factor because Prigozhin didn't want to spill too much blood. But, you know, they weren't stopped with force. They were stopped with negotiation. They honed their loyalty to their duty. They honored their loyalty to their duty, to their oaths, and to their people. The courage and self-sacrifice of our fallen hero pilots saved Russia from tragic and devastating consequences. What's interesting here is he's referencing the pilots who were killed, the fallen hero pirates. So there are Wagner soldiers who killed Russian airmen during this march on Moscow. Seven Russian aircraft were shot down, including a command aircraft that had 10 airmen in it. None of the people who fired those anti-air weapons, as of right now, according to the Russian government, are going to be punished, are going to be investigated, or going to be brought to heel in any way. It seems that he's focusing on the leadership of this mutiny. I think seemingly Prigozhin, even though he seems scared to say his name. But he is not going to be punishing any of the people who were the foot soldiers of said mutiny. And I do think that's going to rub the Russian Air Force the wrong way. If you were a Russian airman, how does it feel to know that your comrades who were killed are going to have their killers walk around freely, even as they ignored the orders of the central government to back down, and the Russian MOD, which multiple times told them to leave Wagner, join the MOD, contact your MOD representative, leave this rebellion. At the same time, we knew that, by the way, I'm not the only person who acknowledges. I've even seen Russian state TV officials like Solovyev talk about this and talk about it with open frustration, even though they can't be like, Putin's weak and where's Putin doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can tell the frustration on their face as they talk about these fallen airmen and how they kind of died for nothing. At the same time, we knew that the vast majority of fighters and commanders of the Wagner Group are also patriots of Russia. So they're saying that the people who marched on Rostov and occupied the city the size of Dallas, Texas, and marched on Moscow, they're patriots. They're heroes, devoted to their people and state. They've proved it with their courage on the battlefield, liberating the Donbass and Novorossiya. Novorossiya refers to Greater Russia. It's like an imperial wet dream for the Russians. They tried to use them without their knowledge and against their own brothers in arms, with whom they fought together for the country and its future. Therefore, from the very beginning of these events, they took steps on my direct orders to avoid bloodshed. So it seems that he's trying to make the pitch that the Wagner soldiers took steps from the start to avoid bloodshed. and therefore they're all heroes, they're patriots, they fought in the Donbass. It's no biggie. But again, if you're a Russian airman and you're hearing this, what does this say about how the Kremlin values you and your comrades' lives? That he's letting all these people get off scot-free outside of the leadership who, as of right now, is still off scot-free outside of some intense rhetoric from the Kremlin. This took time, including to give those who made a mistake a chance to come to their senses, to understand that society resoundingly rejects their actions. And what tragic... The thing is, I do think the majority of Russians, if polled, would say, I don't want Wagner to march on Moscow and like purge the MOD, even if there's a ton of criticism for the MOD. If you look at the response of Telegram, though, there seems to be a lot of people who are sympathetic to what Prigozhin was saying when he was marching towards the capital. 1,000 are dying a day. This war is being mismanaged. The Ukrainians might march on Crimea. This is all the corrupt bureaucrats who are undermining our work and undermining our heroes and getting them killed on the battlefield. There were people who were sympathetic to that. And I think a lot of the people who laid down arms might have laid down arms in part because they were sympathetic to that message. So I don't think it was all of society who rejected their actions, because you can see people on Telegram and Russian military blogger space who were somewhat supporting their actions. You could see locals in Rostov come out and praise them and give them flowers and give them food and give them drinks and clap for them when they leave. And then when the police come back, they're booing them, going, boo, screw the police. And you even see one person flying a Wagner flag in Rostov. Now, this is in Rostov. It's going to be different in St. Petersburg. It's going to be different in Moscow. They're closer to the war. There's, Wagner was there and they were occupying it. So there's a different dynamic there. But my point is that there was more support for this than I expected, even if it still wasn't the majority of Russians. And that should be concerning for the Russian state. And what actually, can I actually show you guys an example of this? I think an example of this I can show you is just the response on Telegram to this. 1 second. Let's see. Do I have it? Do I have it? Do I have it? Here it is. So the first one is Prigozhin's announcement of, this coup, not this coup, but this mutiny, 32 hearts, 13,000 upvotes, 12,000 more heart like face emojis, clap, fire, and 2.4 clowns, right? Okay. This isn't a super scientific method, but I'm just trying to prove a point. Then you look at the second message, which is him calling it off, saying he's turning around because of the deal negotiated by Lukashenko. 341,000 clowns, 102,000 downvotes. 4.9 thousand stone faces, 8.5 thousand poos. Now there is some support. There's 64,000 hearts, 70K upvotes, 60K fires, but a certain percentage of the people who are downvoting this are downvoting it not because they just hate Prigozhin, but because they think Prigozhin should have gone further. And I saw Wagner affiliated Telegram channels saying that exact message, that he was at the cups of purging the MOD, and then he turned around at the last second. So I don't know it was as unified support against the coup as he is saying. And a lot of the public, and this is a lot more concerning, I think, for the Russian government, is that the Russian government has relied on political apathy to stay in power, right? But if the people are politically apathetic, then they're also not going to go into the streets and fight a bunch of tanks and armored vehicles for your regime. Just saying. I think the soldiers and commanders of the Wagner Group who made the correct decision and did not move ahead with fratricidal bloodshed. He is thanking the soldiers who killed probably around 20 Russian airmen during their march on Moscow in a direct challenge to his power, as he told them to stop. It wasn't just Gerasimov. It wasn't just Shoigu, which is what, of course, Wagner is going to focus on. It's also Putin. Putin told him to stop, and Prigozhin's response on Telegram is, Mr. President, you're sorely mistaken, and he kept marching. They stopped at the last minute. Today, you have the opportunity. Now, this is important. Today, you have the opportunity to continue serving Russia by signing a contract with the defense ministry. Okay, so one of the options is, look, drop Wagner, come join the regular armed forces, get your deduction in pay, and less independence. Woo, I don't know how many are going to follow that advice. Or other law enforcement agencies, or you can return home to your loved ones. So the other option is, hey, join the Russian armed forces, the MOD specifically, or you can go home. You know, go home to the missus, you know, start pumping out some babies, do whatever. But then this last part is what's interesting to me, and we're going to talk about it in a moment once we wrap this all up. Those who wish will be able to leave for Belarus. The promise I made will be kept. So we're going to brush past this for now, but we're going to come back to this afterwards. I repeat, the choice belongs to each of you, but I am confident it will be the choice of Russian soldiers who have realized their tragic mistake. I am grateful to the president of Belarus, Mr. Alexander Lukashenko, for his efforts and contribution to the peaceful resolution of the situation. I repeat, it was precisely the patriotic spirit of citizens and the consolidation of Russia's entire society that played the decisive role in these past few days. Their support allowed us to overcome the most difficult challenges for our motherland. Thank you for that. So, before I get to this, and I get to some of the finer points that I want to touch on, I want to show you guys the reaction to this on Telegram, which was posted by Anna. Now, this is just a snapshot. This is just a snapshot of the reactions on Telegram. These are just some of the people on the Russian military blogger space that was reacting to this. So this isn't a general representation of the entire population, but I just want to show you the reaction that some people were having to this speech on Telegram. And these are the people who support the war. And this is what Anna was able to translate. This is from one account. Okay, fine. That's it? What was that? Vova, are you a fucktard? No, really, it's over. That's it? That's it? Okay, I am a naive fool. I am done. Determined the fate for real. Okay. And the last one's translation. So saying, here's the translation for you guys. I looked some other places as well. Nobody is super praising this speech unless it's quite literally a Russian government official. Nobody is praising this speech in its entirety as, wow, this is 100% fantastic. If they're an actual Russian person just like on the street corner, like posting online. I haven't seen those messages. I'm sure they exist somewhere. Maybe the people who are less online, maybe those in more rural communities. And there are people who are saying, well, you know, this isn't the best result, but we need to rally around the president. But the general reaction to this is, so they get off? There's not going to be any punishment for this? That's it? You've really not said anything new. And that's what I want to talk about when we reference what he said here about Belarus. Those who wish will be able to leave for Belarus. This promise I made, I will keep. So for those of you who don't know, the deal between Putin and Prigozhin was negotiated by Lukashenko, and reportedly Lukashenko allowed Prigozhin to basically go to Belarus, and he's hanging out there now. He's hanging out in Belarus, at least that's what's being reported. We don't have any pictures of him there. There's been like some news agencies that was reported that they've seen him, but we have no video or photographic evidence of him being there. But we have good reason to believe he is there. Now, if Putin is saying that the Wagner people can also go to Belarus, then that could indicate that Wagner is not going to dissolve. That Wagner, not only are the foot soldiers who participated in this coup not going to be punished, and as of right now, even though in this speech he seems to kind of flip-flop back from the idea that the FSB put forward that they're no longer having a warrant out for Prigozhin, and the FSB has now said, actually, they're still investigating Prigozhin, and Putin puts out this hard language. As of right now, Prigozhin has not been arrested, and if he continues to not be arrested, then that's another person involved in this that's going to get off scot-free. In fact, the person who orchestrated this getting off scot-free, also while Putin, not only during his original reaction to the speech, he said there would be revenge and those who did this will be punished, but he continues to double down on that point, at least for those who organized it, and those people, and he still has yet to arrest Prigozhin. But on top of everything else, if he allows the Wagner people to go to Belarus and set up training camps and set up facilities and continue to operate as Wagner, as an independent entity headed by Prigozhin, then Prigozhin got away with this scot-free. Prigozhin got away with this 100% scot-free. And no amount of tough messages and, oh, that's very naughty of you, is going to be able to, clear up the fact that Prigozhin got away with it. And that's why you're seeing this reaction from a lot of people online. and just amongst Russian society. I've talked to a lot of people with family in Russia who says their family's confused as to why they're not being punished, or, you know, they know that Putin looks weak doing this and they don't like that. If Prigozhin does not get arrested or killed and he continues to operate Wagner, that means that there were zero repercussions for his forces killing active Russian servicemen on a march towards Moscow in a direct challenge to Putin's rule. And Prigozhin has said this is true. As in a message we're going to watch next, that's going to be the next segment, Prigozhin has said that he's going to continue to operate, or that Lukashenko has offered him the opportunity to continue to operate Wagner outside of Belarus. This could mean that maybe he's going to be operating in the Central African Republic. He's going to be operating in maybe Mali, maybe in Libya, possibly Sudan if they get more involved in that. And he's going to be able to rake in the profits from the mines and resource deals that he's made in those regions. He gets off scot-free. What message does this send to the hard and soft Siloviki? What message does this send to the security apparatus, to the FSB, to, you know, anybody who's an oligarch in that society, to Russian politicians, to those in the Russian Ministry of Defense, to other private military companies, to Wagner, to Prigozhin? It says that Putin had a mutiny against him and he couldn't punish them and he had to negotiate with them. So now other PMCs are going to be thinking, could we get some negotiations? Could we get favorable treatment? Could we do something to protect our independence or our organization? But less than that, because not any other PMC has as much influence as Wagner or strength and power or independence. There could be Russian oligarchs who are thinking, wow, even if I'm not going to plan a coup against Putin, I do need to prepare a contingency plan. And it seemed like a lot of oligarchs and a lot of Russian politicians were ready to do the wait and see approach. And if they were willing to do the wait and see approach last time, next time they're almost certainly going to plan a contingency plan if Putin goes under. Or they could be the ones planning Putin's downfall themselves. We're seeing if maybe they could try something similar, since Russia's flanks and rear are still not protected. Putin could not muster much of a defense against Prigozhin. They resorted to digging holes in the road. They resorted to bombing them, but that didn't work because then their planes were shot down. The police and all these people put down their arms. How strong is Putin really? While before, this conversation was not had, and the idea of Putin having a extremely strong hold on power in this country was a foregone conclusion, now there's a question mark there. And while this does not necessarily mean that Putin's regime is going to collapse, this does mean that people in Russia are going to think about his regime collapsing. They're going to think about a post-Putin Russia much more. And many of them are going to think about the consequences of the disastrous invasion of Ukraine, both economically, politically, and militarily, and when it just comes to a basic level of stability within the Russian Federation. This has made it so a challenge to Putin's direct authority is no more hypothetical, but a reality. As in, we've seen it happen, it is possible, and maybe it could happen again. Now, Putin could always, reconsolidate power and maybe try to kill Prigozhin and dissolve Wagner anyway and go back on his deal. But I think the toothpaste is kind of out of the tube in this scenario. You can already see it from the reactions to the speech. You can already see it from the extremely strong words that Putin is giving while Prigozhin is still able to openly criticize the Russian MOD on Telegram. He's saying he's going to continue Wagner. It looks like you can challenge Putin's authority and get away with it. And that's a very dangerous thing to happen in a dictatorship when your authority needs to be unquestioned. Putin has survived this long by smashing every single figure that could rise themselves to be a direct challenge to his authority. Any institution that could rise to be a direct challenge to his authority. He has on many occasions pitted these organizations and people against each other in order to keep them infighting so they cannot rise to challenge him. This disaster, in fact, is part of his own making because he was using Prigozhin and using Wagner to power balance with the military. So they can criticize Shoigu and Gerasimov for their failures in managing the war. They can take the brunt of the criticism for the failures. They can take the brunt of all of Russia's strategic losses and not him. Also, while making sure that hero figures don't rise out of the military. This disaster spilled out from that. It spilled out from that power balancing. He let Wagner get too out of control. And now he's reached a point of no return. You know, they say you can't uncross. Well, I don't know if they say you can't uncross the Rubicon, but once you've crossed the Rubicon, you've crossed the Rubicon. And even if Wagner has now attempted to uncross the Rubicon from turning it around, no one's going to forget the fact that he did cross the Rubicon and he lived to tell the tale. And this speech right here does not push back against that narrative hard enough. It does not push back against that worm that has now wiggled its way into the heads of the Russian elite. Putin looks weak, and this speech did nothing to alleviate those concerns. And from the reaction we've seen online and what I've heard from word of mouth, it has not worked on alleviating the concerns of average Russian citizens. Outside of maybe the random kind of, loyalist babushka, it is what it is type. This is not a good response from Putin, and unless it is followed by a hard crackdown on Wagner, the message is being sent that you can directly challenge the MOD, and more importantly, Putin, reject his authority and get away with it. That's very dangerous, but he has put himself in this situation by stretching his forces too thin, making it so he had no one in order to challenge Wagner's march on Moscow. He armed a bunch of untrustworthy criminal mercenaries, led by a former criminal, Prigozhin, who used to be, a street criminal, then a hot dog salesman, then personal caterer for the president, before heading this, I don't know, we call it a mercenary group, but now it seems like the warlord's fiefdom. And he gave him a bunch of guns, gave him a bunch of supplies, and wouldn't you know it, once given the opportunity, this unloyal group of criminals and thugs turned their guns on their masters because they thought that they were under threat. There's no unfucking the situation for Putin, and this speech certainly did not do the work of unfucking the situation.